before I call the meeting to order, we just do a roll call?
Yeah, do you want
Yeah,
us to
that
do
would be
it
great.
first? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So, what do you want to start with yourself there, Laura?
Okay, me. Hi, Sadie.
Thanks.
Sean Hicks, Boswell.
Ron Lewandowski, Rindell Road. Sean Moss, Great Creek. Julie March, Crawford Bay.
Director.
And Crow, Crawford Bay.
Perfect. And I'm Sadie Chizenko, a planning technician with the planning department. Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll call the meeting to order at 2 p.m. on March 7th, 2:03. Got to get my watch going. We acknowledge and respect the Indigenous peoples within whose traditional lands we are meeting today. Adoption of the agenda. So, can I move it? That's okay.
Well, normally, yes.
Yeah, I asked
Sure,
her,
okay.
that's right. But yeah, would anybody like to move the adoption of the agenda? So, I'll second Michelle and then Veronica seconds it.
On discussion,
Oh,
as a visitor, I'd suggest you reorder the agenda to do 5.2. Ken's application first, Ken Shuttle second.
that's,
Give you
thank
more
you.
time.
I would,
Reorder the agenda.
thank you, that's what I,
It's-
okay,
we're not always-
excellent, thanks. Lori.
We're learning.
Yeah, I said it earlier, I just didn't put it right in on there.
Sadie, if you can't hear, just let me know and I can move the
Yeah,
laptop.
sounds good.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm hearing so far.
Okay.
Let's, you shifted, you've got that we shift in 5.2 and 5.1. Okay, and then we adoption, receipt of minutes from February 1st, 2024. Electoral Aid Advisory Planning Heritage Commission minutes have been received. Oh, this item does not require a motion, so then we need to move on to staff reports. So we've shifted, so we will first look at Ken Crow's development variance permit application 1068616 BC Limited. The referral package dated March 2nd, 2024 from planner Stephanie Johnson has been received. This application seeks to vary provisions of RUCK subdivision bylaw number 2159/2011. And then from here, I will ask the applicant to give a brief overview, and then we'll go from there. So, thank you, Ken.
Thanks for letting me say this out loud to somebody. What I'm trying to do is, I've got one piece of property, it's 27 acres. There's 20 acres on the corner. So it's just bushland, basically on the corner of the Riondo Road. It goes down to the ferry. And the other 7 acres is on the Riondo Road, with 2 houses on it at this time. 20 acres, I put a new well in. I've got a type 1 septic approved. I don't have to put it in, to my understanding. The 2 houses is the issue here, I believe, is what's causing a bit of an issue. I've had an engineer come in and right now I have 2 type 2 systems. Both houses have their own septic right now. And in order to get a subdivision, try to split this into 3 pieces of 20 acres and then the 7 acres into 2 pieces at about 3.5 acres each roughly. Both houses have their own septic at this time. Both houses have their own water. They're self-sufficient at this time. What I've needed to prove, and I guess I thought I just needed to prove I could have another septic in case these failed. And I have a type 2. A type 1 is not, it's just rock there. So a type 1 is not really doable there. A type 2 is doable. I've had an engineer draw that up for me. I RDCK says I need a type 1 system, which I can't really have, and I'm struggling to understand. A type 2 is a government issued, it's not like I'm making something up or trying to put my own system in. A type 2 is a recognized system. And the RDCK is saying, I can't have that, I can't have a type 2, which I know there's quite a few around here, and I already have 2 of them. So this is where I struggle to, you know, I'd like to move forward, and I don't need to put these systems in. They're in case something fails, is that further down the line. So I don't know what I can do if I can't put a type 1 in, and you won't let me put a type 2 in. Is this property useless? Or where do I pump the sewage if one fails? So this is where I struggle with the bylaw, I guess, from my end. That a type 2 is doable. It's a government approved system, and they seem to not want me to put this in. So this is why I'm asking for this variance, is to say, if something fails, I could put a type 2 in and have septic on both of those pieces, I guess.
But you can't put in, sorry.
So we'll get a chance to discuss.
So I think that's basically where I'm at. I'm just, this seems to be the biggest hurdle moving forward here for the subdivision. There's a couple other things yet to take care of, but until I get that done, there's some things I'm not going to spend any more money on in order to, in case this doesn't fly, I guess. So I guess today I'm here to ask you guys to understand what I'm saying for my subdivision. I think I have another meeting in April in Nelson with the RDCK. I think that's how I understand it, but today I'm here to, hopefully you can see my situation and we can come to some kind of agreement to move this along.
Are you ready for questions then?
Fire away.
Veronica, did you have a question?
I just, between the 1 and the 2, and I don't know what the difference is between them. You have a type 2 septic system for each, for block or
A and B
A and B.
at this time.
And they want you to prove that you can put in a type 1 for both of them as backup,
Correct.
correct? And you don't want to do that.
Not that I don't want to, it's not spotted because of it's basically rock. If for a type 1, you need soil, and it's not like I'm asking to put one. This could be 10, 20 years from now, there may need to be one in.
Just in case of failure.
In case of a failure.
System
Right.
that is there.
Right.
Sadie can clarify the subdivision bylaw and that type 1.
What they need.
Yeah, why they are requesting a type 1, or that you prove a type 1, that it's. Sadie, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys just want some insight as to the current, regulations or maybe possibly the rationale behind them, I can provide that. But feel free, I'm just offering it as an option.
Do you want I would like some clarification about why why it hasn't been approved.
Yeah, if I could suggest, because, and just a few moving parts, so we'll go to the road committee, I'll be in the road committee. And when we talk about this, we're gonna talk about more of the bylaws from 2011. Normally, we could have a staff overview the application and some of the parameters, why this particular bylaw reads who it is, and you could go into the presentation first or second. But I think it would make a lot of sense to have as good of explanation as we can, because I was there when we set this bylaw And it was around nervousness about whether or not people had the wherewithal to look after, maintain a type 2 system, that type 2 system. And there were very few back then. But Sadie, I think, yeah, your perspective and why we got this in this particular bylaw now, and the trend would be of use, I think, of interest in what kind of systems you're seeing, because on my construction sites, I see type 2 systems continue.
All the time, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess just a little bit of background, and Gary, I mean, is an engineer and knows more, but from the planning perspective, you know, the reason that the subdivision bylaw exists and the idea behind it is to promote, you know, good future development. One of the things about a type 1 system and why a type 1 system is required as opposed to say a type 2 or type 3 is partially because of the cost. So a type 1 system is much cheaper and much easier to maintain and replace. Part of the issue with that is if someone goes, you know, for future development to work on the lot, they might expect, you know, I don't know exactly the cost, but say the $10,000 to $20,000 to install that type of a system. But then when we talk about these more complicated systems, they cost a lot more and they can add significant you know, issues for developing those properties in the future. So that's part of the issue. You know, the idea behind it is just to have the simplest system possible. And this variance application is the way for Ken or any applicant to say, hey, can this not be the case for me? But what we're really just trying to promote with these regulations is, you know, making sure we don't have any problems in the future, if that makes sense.
So can I clarify that then?
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
so ultimately, my understanding from Ken is he's submitted an application and been denied a type 2. Did I misunderstand? No, this is just the process right now.
Yeah.
We're in it right now. Okay.
Yeah,
so
and
type
it's
2 a type 1 isn't possible. So you're basically applying for a type 2 and looking for,
Basically, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so that's where.
and to clarify, yeah, Ken is right. You know, if you just had your regular property, you could install any type of septic system that's approved by the government, right? You could install type 1, type 2, type 3. That's up to you. What he's running into is the fact that we have this subdivision bylaw that specifies that, you know, simpler system. So it's not that, you know, say if he could provide proof of a type 1 system on this lot, when they actually go to install that system, they could choose to go with a type 2, but we're looking for proof that the type 1 can be accommodated. Well, the initial and the reserve of the type 1.
Or grant your variance.
Yes, exactly.
And
Yeah.
but the premise of this is because of the subdivision being applied for and.
Exactly.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is, okay,
And if I could have put a type 1 in, definitely would have went that route, but the engineer said you can't, with the land and the rock, it's not possible to put a type 1 in. Believe me, if I could do things cheaper,
yeah,
I would be doing that.
okay. So I guess, is there any other questions then to the applicant?
Tell us a little bit about the history of the two type 2 fields that are in place. How, like their age, when they were installed?
You know what, I bought this property, I'm gonna say 11 years ago, and they were in place at the time. So the history of them, I have little to no knowledge. I get them serviced once a year, basically from my group out of Creston. I usually do it in the spring and just make sure they're maintained, I guess, basically. But
And what's involved in maintaining the type 2 system?
there's a couple of filters in there, and then I get to drain the tanks, clean the tanks out, and that's what I do. So it's not. I think that's what you're supposed to do. I guess.
And these are essentially sand mounts.
Yeah.
Affluent pipes. And
Yeah. There's a two tank system pumps it up into the field.
that's for the 3-bedroom dwelling
Both of them, yeah.
and also for the 5-bedroom.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Gary, you maybe you could answer this question, how difficult is it to maintain a type two system for just anybody? Is it complicated?
If we dial back to when we had these conversations and with Interior Health and everyone else, it's not difficult if someone, your contract, which sounds like the applicant has, it's not that difficult. The worry was the neglect. Because of the track record, people maybe rarely or almost never pumping their tank for a type one system or this or that. So the worry was that maybe somebody would just say, oh, got something I can trim my God. Never spend any more money on it. The evidence here is that there's already a contract in place that can demonstrate that maintenance is occurring. So the problem was, there weren't very many people who knew about these systems, who maintained them. There was a worry that there wasn't capacity to, for people who wanted to do the right thing. So now, as they say, pretty common, raised bed sand infiltration system is pretty common because you dig around here, you hit either bedrock or it's drains too fast. In some of the areas, it's all very good strata. And so you have to put in some material that slows the percolation rate down, so it doesn't come out in daylight and pitch 50 feet or 100 feet, 200 feet from the house.
Okay, any other questions from the commission? So at this point, we would ask you to sit back while we discuss. I'm just learning about this.
It's a little bit academic.
What's that?
Yeah, it's a little academic from this side.
Yeah, it's a little academic, exactly. You can plug your ears, la, 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 la. We'll try and talk over it. Yeah, you're like, yeah.
Absolutely able, all the public to be in hear all the conversation. You just normally wouldn't go back to the applicant, with more questions.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, a little, I like that, a little academic for the size of the room. Thank you. Here we are. So any discussion here?
I just learned from Sean that there's actually a part C, but that's not in question here. There's,
Part C is the 20 acre
is across the road.
across the road, and it's approved for a type one. It's got good enough soil for a type, so,
So it's not in question.
It's just the two
It's
houses.
seems to be today.
Today.
So it's the two houses on the 7 acres, not the other 20 acres that are looking to.
It's deep, yeah. That's where I need the variance.
That's where the variance. So from my understanding, thank you for the clarification. I think that's, go ahead.
Well, because now it's a good time to put questions to staff as well, if you want to maybe through the Sadie, that this is referring to Ontario Health Authority. They probably would not hesitate to express their concerns, just depending on the, you know, the shape and slope of the land and proximity to the lake. There's one thing to have sewage daylight in the ditch where kids might get out of the car and walk or whatever, anyone walking, but into the lake is
So-
also an issue. So it's Sadie, through the chair, if I can. Interior Health will state any other concerns or any recommendations that they may see as being necessary for making sure the environment's protected.
Yeah, Interior Health, I think I'd have to double check the file, but I think I remember them responding and saying that they will also be recommending, because they're also a referral agency on subdivisions. They don't really support, if applications where the type 1 systems can't be supported for the same reasons as the RDCK, but ultimately it's up to the Ministry of Transportation to make the final determination.
But I guess the point of Interior Health, if a supplemental is aware,
Sorry.
they're aware where they're happening and they're able to comment. If they see an extreme issue, then they can comment specifically.
Mhm.
Clarification, it sounds to me that the applicant has had an engineer come in and say that the type 2 is possible on both pieces. So would there be documentation supported by that would have to be sent into Interior Health?
In the package there, it's,
Right, so it's already there, right? We have the information, so does this information I guess I'm asking you guys, get submitted into, or say it gets submitted to Interior Health and then they make a call on it based on the engineer's
Well,
documentation?
everything goes to the Ministry of Transportation. We don't approve subdivisions and it goes to health authority.
And
Everything goes to court. Yeah,
Sadie,
so-
I wonder if it would be worth just talking about the subdivision application process?
Yeah.
Just so the group knows.
Yeah, I can definitely give you guys a quick overview because it's a little bit funny. It's not really the same as municipalities. When you make a subdivision application, you make it to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, who is the approving authority for rural areas. The Ministry of Transportation will do its intake and then they'll refer it out to different agencies for their comments. The RDCK is one of those agencies, so is Interior Health. For the Ministry of Transportation to approve a subdivision, typically they won't do that until they've gotten confirmation that the applicant is not in contravention of any RDCK bylaws. So that would be like the land use bylaw, zoning bylaw, OCP, but also the subdivision bylaw. And so we're looking typically that in order to approve a subdivision, we want to see that there's septic capacity for the 2 type 1 systems, proof of water on each lot. So that's either a well, approved water license, or a connection to a community system. And then also just usually confirmation from a surveyor that there's no issues with buildings in the new lot lines. There can be other requirements, but once the applicant has met all of those RDCK requirements, we'll basically write them, the Ministry of Transportation, a letter saying, hey, they've met all requirements. And then it goes back to Modi to do all their final things, like looking at access and that kind of stuff. Did you guys have more questions on that?
That was great clarification. This is just one part of it.
Yeah, it's a lot. I apologize.
No, that's great. Thank you for the clarification. I just learned something. Any other questions? Anyone? And then, so at this point, we're basically what we're being asked to do is determine if we are going to approve the variance,
Yeah, you're either supporting or not approving, supporting or not supporting.
supporting or not.
The rural committee and then the board will approve or not approve
Okay, so,
our recommendation, but forward it to the Ministry of Transportation, and they'll approve or not approve.
okay, so at this point, I can say all in support.
Well, I'd like
No.
a motion
Oh,
that
okay.
we support the development variance permit that Mr. Crowe has submitted to us for our consideration.
Yeah, so you take the staff recommendation, and it's your, said support, and then that has all the legal description on it.
And
You could move the staff recommendation with the retaining the word support.
so, I as the chair move it?
Oh, no,
No.
I'm sorry.
Oh, so
Mr.
do we need,
Ritz,
does somebody need to second it, or that's it?
you need to move second, call for discussion, further discussion, vote.
So I make a motion that we support
Yeah.
the development variance permit submitted by Mr. Crowe. In regards to Lot 5, District Lot 4595, Kootenai District Plan 811, except parts included in plans 3062, 16541, R127, NEP 60734, NEP 68076, NEP 69201, and NEP 72451.
So
For a second,
as chair, can I second it?
we need commission member consent.
Okay, so I will second the support of the motion and resolve that it be recommended to the board.
No, just
No.
if you second the motion and then you call for further discussion.
Okay, so I will second the motion and I call in for further discussion.
And if you have none, go to the vote. Call the vote.
Okay, and so now we go to a vote. All in support?
And I don't vote on a resource, I'm not in the previous.
Okay. So unanimous.
So
And
that,
so now I can resolve that it be recommended. to-
well, no,
It's
that
already
is
done.
all.
That's all part of it.
So that will go, staff will,
You got that, Sadie?
Yeah.
Yeah, all
One-
good. Thank you.
Next step of this, not always very fast process.
Yeah.
But
All right, through this one.
Yeah.
That's okay.
We've made it through this one.
Well, I got one step closer. Yeah, appreciate your time and, your support. So that. Thanks, Sadie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Take care.
Bye, Glenn. Thanks for bearing with me as I learn some academic language here. Okay, so now we are ready to do this.
we'll go now to 5-1, unless you want to
Oh,
further.
he's not here.
Is, did Jeff?
He's not, no.
So do we look at this even if he's not here, Gary?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
He
as
is,
long as he's
uh,
invited
invited up to
and
me.
it's given the opportunity.
Okay, sorry, my bad. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so go back to 5-1, development variance permit application to 4028 Jeff Shaxton, package dated February. Do I need to say all this?
No,
No, just have, just,
I think that's good.
that's good, thank you. Okay. All right, and so now we're going to this and
So here you might ask for any additional staff information or ask questions of staff.
okay. Well,
I was surprised. I said, oh, this is area. It's kind of weird.
Oh,
This-
okay.
Thank you, very one.
Right, okay. So, yeah, well, do we have any staff input on,
I can give a little overview, if that would be helpful. So this application is another development variance permit, but unlike the previous one, the variance is to the comprehensive land use bylaw rather than the subdivision bylaw. And so this one, in the land use bylaw, which I think you guys have copies of now, they specify setbacks, and this is, for a couple different reasons. It can kind of set the way the community looks, but there's also kind of more health and safety issues. Typically, a 2.5 meter setback exists for spatial separation and fire purposes and that kind of thing. In this case, the applicant used to have, I believe, a detached garage in this one spot, but then it burnt down. And so he's just looking to rebuild his garage in the same place, but that would require a small variance. So rather than building 2.5 meters back from the line, I think it would be 1.5 meters from the line. Also, maybe important to note is the two neighbors who are directly adjacent to where the proposal is have written in letters of support for this application. I think that's the only thing you guys wouldn't know. And feel free to ask me any questions if you have any.
okay. And
I might note, 5 foot or 1.5 foot setback was the setback in these kind of situations for decades. And then as the Dominion Fire Commissioner thinks about stuff, one shed or garage catches fire, the next one's only 5 feet across the one on the other side. And you have a delayed response or no response for fire, you're likely to burn down the next building. Where you'll see is where you do have fire departments, you do have coverage, and areas like this do have coverage every contract, sometimes it goes even less. But it's just a federal thing changed, the province said, yeah, we'll change this, and we change it, sort of a stuff flows downhill situation. And the fact that it was there already, it had 2 walls of this garage remained intact, plus a foundation that had the grandfather right to rebuild it anyway, whereas if it's completely gone, there's no right they have to request a variance.
these things didn't burn down.
Right, and they're fine with it.
And their support.
Can you clarify the extent that the damage was? Was it greater than 75%?
Oh, that I don't know, Sadie, complete right off. They're gone.
Yeah, when I just took a peek before the meeting, it looked like it was a write-off, so they wouldn't have had that legal non-conforming protection.
Right, Sean,
Yes.
on this picture here, what is the,
That's the section.
oh, here, yeah.
See at the bottom right, the larger block.
All right, so here, here we would ask if there's any discussion or questions about this.
Well, you could move the recommendation if you want to either support or not support. And then have more discussion on that, or you can just keep discussing until you're ready to pick one, I guess.
So it's up to me to pick one?
No, not at all.
No, no.
Any member of the commission, if you're ready to
Oh,
move
to move it.
recommendation,
Got it.
no, it's just, you can do that.
Got it.
If you're not ready to move it, then ask more questions of Sadie or whatever you need.
So just some general comments. Based on experiences I've witnessed. Buildings are supposed to be, according to RDCK bylaws, a minimum of 3 meters apart from each other. It's a fire separation for safety.
Unless you have a rated exterior finish,
Okay. Like a cement board or something, or,
many options.
okay, okay. The building is, any structures that are erected are supposed to be 2.5 meters from the side lot lines or the rear lot lines. So in this case, the slab remains, but the footprint of it is within that 2.5 meters. My concern is, we're not only taking into consideration the property owners' property, but also the adjacent neighbors as well. And what I'm seeing on our aerial photos is there's vegetation in that area. So if there was an addition, a future fire, there is potential for trees to catch on fire. And fires can jump from tree to grass to structure potentially. So that's a concern that I have is future neighbors also being affected by our decision.
Can I just comment that as it stands right now, the 2 adjacent neighbors have sent in letters of support for the rebuild? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Sadie, do you want to talk about the variance, just the referral process?
How many neighbors received it, that kind of process, time they had to respond?
Yeah, I can provide more information, but Gary kind of covered it there.
So go ahead. Sadie.
Yeah, so
That's
for
where-
no, it's a good learning experience. So with development variance permits, when we process them at the RDCK, we do the intake and then we basically create this referral package and that's sent out to different agencies for comment, including the Advisory Planning and Heritage Commission, which is, you know, the purpose of our meeting today. But there's also a neighbor notification that's done. So anyone within 100 meters, 100 feet, 100 meters, it's in the procedures bylaw, but basically all of the direct neighbors are going to be notified and then some, and they're given an opportunity to comment. And so we receive all those comments, and then as part of the staff report that'll go to the elected officials for review, the staff report will include all of those comments as well as your comments all together for consideration.
And how much time do the neighbors have to respond?
The neighbors have 30 days. Typically though, even if they respond a bit later, it's fine. We just give that 30-day timeline because, you know, if these applications do move really quickly, if, you know, we're having a low volume month, which never happens, just to make sure we get those comments in on time. But
Okay.
they could be received later as well.
So other options, and we'll do this sometimes at rural committee. There's a lot of zero clearance buildings that don't pose a risk to the use and enjoyment of the neighboring property. Except, you know, depending on the nature of the structure, might actually shade your garden or cause some other issue that doesn't have to do with another dwelling or shed or buildings. It might be at risk under reasonable, you know, sort of fire separation. But if the landowner says they're not concerned about that, what they may find a few years from now is they're the ones who set back the extra meter in order to satisfy the fire code. Or you could also request that the have some fire rating. It's proposed to be stucco You could say that, you know, you would approve it, but your recommendation would be subject to no openings, windows or other, well, no windows or doors that may not meet that fire rating. And if you look at classic glass, I did the design for that one, they're closer to the line, and we've included concrete board and the aluminum soffit. The soffit doesn't bend around the entire building in town there. So there's other things you can do, so even the roof overhang is less of a hazard to have a fire through the wall, up through the soffit, burn the roof, and then the burning roof ignite the next building. So just kind of the general statement that, you know, you would want to see measures taken to minimize the risk or to create some degree of fire rating in that structure, within that design that minimizes risk to the neighborhood. Now, our building department might say exactly the same thing, regardless of what we gotta say. That's just kind of, don't have windows facing the neighboring property, well, that's a greater risk then, especially if it's a garage. Because if a vehicle burns, that's an intense fire and they blow the windows out. Spread the heat. So those are the kind of things you can think about. Or you can fall back more onto the current landowner's decision, which yes, impacts future use in the journey.
I have a question, and I'm not a builder, so I don't know. But if there's a footprint, as you say, John, that is a little too close to the boundaries, and we're looking here. Something that they would add, you know, another strip of concrete to make the slab bigger, but and move the building over that way. Because that's, I mean, I don't know if that's something that.
Many things are possible. If a concrete slab is too close, that doesn't count. You can be as high as 2 feet, say, off the ground without being a risk, fire risk in the case. Be within 2.5 meters, you're not more than 2 meters high. So leaving part of the slab up there, building smaller adjacent, that's possible. I guess the question to you is that reasonable?
Not builders, so I don't know. If the concern is the building being close to the perimeters and the fire hazard is the building itself, not the concrete. If the concrete stays here, but then another piece gets added and then the building gets moved over, so there's. You know what I mean?
So it's further away from the vegetation, so that it meets the 2.5 feet clearance.
So if it's a heated building and you need frost protection because you have a vertical and horizontal rigid foam board protection, and moving the building will compromise the frost protection, the partial heating and slab back to the downstream structure. If it's unheated, not frost protected, that might be subject to scrutiny as well. There's quite a few concerns that once you come off the foundation line,
Right.
it's not just sliding it over,
Right.
but time and money, a lot of things are possible.
Also, Gary, I mean, if one of the concerns is vegetation nearby, well, that vegetation is going to grow anyway. So even if you move the building, the tree's going to grow and there's no difference.
Yeah. There's a proposal, Sadie could talk about this, floating about for residential structures. Would the government local government want to look at anything to do with proximity to trees, for exactly that kind of reason? You'll see a number of municipalities, you can no longer plant the pine tree or have certain readily flammable shrubs or bushes in certain proximity to your house. But those are other bigger issues, because you'll probably find in Boswell, there was more tree trimming done 2 years ago than 20 years previous. Because people take that on themselves, and wow, they're all vulnerable.
Kind of protect your house, right? More than it would.
Yeah, so you can't really predict what's gonna happen.
I guess when this fire and this damage occurred, what were the ramifications when this happened? Were there any other property damage to the adjacent homes?
And what was the weather like? Like, was it really dry or what did it happen when it was wet? Do we even know the mechanism of the fire? What?
Well, again, that kind of gets outside of the landowners that accept the
Right, exactly.
risk that,
Then
well, it's
Yeah.
So this parcel will also probably two other subject approval or
This
consent.
one and this, right, that makes sense.
And they're the two that.
And this one's
homestead
really
this,
close.
Right? And they've, they're in support.
Right, so they get it. Any more questions for me? No.
I did pull up the planning procedures bylaw, but I didn't get so far as to the distance, but as Sadie indicated, there's a, no, depending on what it is being requested, there's a different radius for notification from what you think, certain distance from the corners of the property question.
Yeah, everyone within 100 meters, so 328 feet, gets a mail out notification.
Oh, everyone within 100 meters, okay.
The 2.5 meters from the property line too, there's a reduction that's allowed of 0.6 meters, which is 2 feet for if you have an eave or any protrusion to the building itself. So if that is taken into consideration, the 2.5, which is required, minus the 0.6, brings it into the 1.9 meter distance if you're taking it from, for instance, an eave. So the 1.9 that I referred to versus the 1.6 that it actually is right now on the one boundary, the southern lot line. I mean, it's pretty close. It's just tight. So it's tight to within. So I think if the neighbors have signed off on it.
That's what I'm going to.
Any further discussion? That being said, then I'd like to make a motion that our commission is in support of the variance to the CLUB 2315-2013 for Mr. Jeff Shatsko at property located 4481 Highway 3A in Newfoundland.
Now, questions of staff if I can on this, with this discussion, Chair. The actual variance would go to the landowner. I haven't really come across this. I put in building permit applications on behalf of, because you're either gonna hear this now or when I go through agenda prep next week. If you will. Should we be naming Jeff Shatsko? I mean, the application is from the builder, but the variance is granted to the property. So I don't know if that should stay in or not. You can think about it and answer me next Wednesday.
I think the planning team talked about it and looked into it, and we're supposed to use the applicant's name, not necessarily the owner's name.
Right, so Zach,
Yeah, so Jeff Shatsko, it's a cool name, I think would be the correct name to have in there, but I'll make a note to follow up with Nelson, Director Jackman, just to be sure.
Perfect. Thanks.
Jeff Shatsko is the owner, right?
No, he's
Oh,
Denco Construction.
Yes, oh, I
This, I
see.
referenced the property location in the motion.
Yeah. Just a technicality.
Yeah.
Thanks. We get to it.
Got it.
Jen.
Okay. So it's been moved in second.
Second.
So it's all been recommended to the board and you can move on, correct?
Well, you should, if there's no further discussion, call for a vote.
I guess, just to add further, taking into consideration what Mr. Jackman said with the mitigation measures being suggested, high fire rating, eliminate windows, those sorts of things, if possible, but that's more of a building department issue. So I think they're gonna take that into consideration, right? But all we're doing is making that recommendation.
All right, shall we vote? All in support?
That's carried.
So I just want to clarify, because I'm learning, so once we vote in support, now we can resolve that it be recommended.
No, that it's just one thing.
One thing.
And that will go as a recommendation to the board, and then the committee. did that.
Right. So move second and then vote. That's how we do it. Okay, got it. Learning here.
Ag policy, I don't know who you should blame here, me or Sadie or both. Talk about information overload.
Okay, so on to 6.1 new business, 6.1 agriculture policy background. So, I mean, at this point, do we want you to talk about this, Gary, to give us?
No, I thought sort of the commentary that Sadie put through each step here was pretty good. I just went through some of the stuff that come up as we met with current agricultural land commission and the chair, previous commissioners, previous chair, things went back and forth, recent changes. I thought, well, if you guys wanted a crash course, there's got to be 3 or 4 documents that make sense. But, Sadie's plugged into this more than me. If you either wanted to ask her questions or even just to recap sort of some of the commentary, I think it's well worded.
Okay, so at this point, we've all assumed that we've read it and discussed it, or do we read it? Do I read it out? How would you?
You want Sadie to try and capture what the current state of the Agricultural Land Commission is? Is that fair or unfair through the chair to staff?
Sadie, I guess,
Yeah,
No-
sorry, go
no
ahead.
Big ask, Sadie.
at our
Um,
previous
yeah.
meeting,
Mhm.
I was inquiring about ALR properties to be exempted. And you made a comment that RDCK is not really involved in that process right now. It's something that the homeowners have to go directly through the ALR to achieve.
Sorry, when you say exempted, do you mean like applying
To-
for an exclusion to have their land removed from the agricultural land reserve?
Correct. It's like, for instance, if they don't meet the minimum lot size, for instance. Or if
Oh,
just.
like for subdivision or?
No, just a general exemption.
Like if they want to get taken out of the AL.
Yeah, removal.
So exclusion.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe Gary can provide more insight on this, but my understanding is that the RDCK typically won't process individual applications from landowners to take their land out of the ALR. The only time I think that's going to be considered as like a batch project. So say if an entire kind of community said, hey, there's no agricultural ability on this land, it's all bedrock, it was miscategorized, we want this taken out. Well, then that might be part of a consideration where the local government would kind of lead that project. But yeah, on a 1-by-1 basis, I don't think that's really happening anymore. And maybe Gary, if there's anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So when I was alternate director, so it's going back to 2005, yeah, there was a proposal and discussion with the Land Commission about whether or not local government should be looking at batches of exclusion. The one conversation was excluding the East Shore. So that would be all the Great Creek property that's arable, the Boswell, there's benches along Boswell, that are quite arable. And other areas that came under scrutiny were, say, in Parker Bay, not only the wetlands and surrounding drier areas, floodplain, but also the golf course. It's almost entirely ALR, and Portland's, it used to be Holden's of the Kokanee Springs Resorts. About, well, there's all these one-off applications here and there, and they talk about not good soil or no labor or no cheap labor or two-part market. There's a lot of work. I was actually happy to see that was discarded. If we didn't say, we're not just gonna say, this isn't worth doing, having any agricultural land in an area like Long Beach Shore, that was set aside. Many years later, we had, between different provincial governments, we had a provincial government that said, okay, we're gonna create 2 categories of ALR. The one agricultural land reserve that we value would appear to be, the government valued was southern bank of Island, Lower Mainland and portions of the Okanagan. That was like tier 1. Tier 2 was everything else. And that they were signaling that you could have non-agricultural use, non-farm use, almost anywhere. So that would create a proliferation of whatever you go along Crow's Nest highways, you crest, and there's already a bunch of little shops and stores and stuff. You might see them triple or quadruple. And then the economic value of the land is that commercial operation. It's no longer the agricultural potential. People turn their attention to that, and the town of Creston may show disfavor because they want to be commercial for and have the commercial tax base, not this sprawl. Some of us lobbied against that. We said, well, this is a silly idea also, that where is the the intent of preserving agricultural land for long-term being supported by that kind of thing. That was rolled back with change of government. So then since then, there's been all these other changes. Every few years, the act is changed and we see it continually. Well, now we're gonna, one time we're only allow a secondary residence for family or workers, or we would allow a subdivision in the LR only for, you know, the aging parents who no longer want to farm in their late 70s maybe. They can have a small home, a modular or something in the corner, and the rest of the family can pick up the bulk of the property and continue to farm. Those rules keep changing and shifting. We've done a few things with staff support to say, well, if you want to save the land for agriculture, you can't put too many houses, you can't this, you can't that, you have to actually keep the values in the dirt, not in the structures. Because new young farmers can't afford 6 houses or even 2 houses, they just want 1 house and some dirt. So during some of these changes, we saw just a huge burst of applications. Tagum was one area. Because the Agricultural Land Commission would say, no, we're gonna change the rules again. And so you, after this date, you can't do this. So the one was fall a couple of years ago, and we saw a huge number of people applying, say, oh, I want an exclusion exemption. I want to get out of this before the rules change, because then I'll never get out. So again, we're saying, what are we doing? We can't just keep taking this huge volume of people saying that for the short-term economic gain, almost always, they do better to be non-farming, non-ALR. How is that protecting the land for farming? So what Sadie said is pretty much the policy right now is that we're not looking to start excluding properties just because someone has a reasonably compassionate case. It still happens. Subdivision in the ALR is usually a compassionate argument. It's entirely my personal observation on a board or a rural committee is that we'll get applications come forward, staff will say you shouldn't subdivide this, it probably wouldn't be farmed anymore after 5 or 10 years. And then we'll say, yeah, but there's 3 siblings. If we just cut it up 3 ways, they all have a chance to farm in the future with their own house, their own family and whatever. And so the board has not always followed the advice of staff. Sometimes I vote for something and passionate ground it seems, I reflect on it later and say, you can't keep doing this unless. One of my things with previous Richard Bullock, previous land commission chair, current chair, has been if a landowner wanted to subdivide something tiny, saying they're justifying that each of their offspring can have their own thing and have a viable little farm, then maybe we should have a new zone or new requirement that they have to agree to conform to. And it would probably require them voluntarily putting registering a restrictive covenant on their property. It would be even more restrictive than our current residential footprint, where we say, don't have the big house here, the little house here, and the barn here, and keep the tractor, the boat, the quad, or the side-by-side, and the snowmobiles, and the jet skis, and whatever in this barn here. That's what we see. Someone buys 50 acres, and all the big buildings that add cost are for toys, recreational vehicles and the like. And I could take it as some of it want, because I've worked on it. And there's no way anyone else could possibly afford that unless they're extraordinarily wealthy and they need those barns or whatever. There's not enough land to hay to use the barn if you wanted to. It's oversized development. So we could tell people if they want to create small parcels for the longevity of niche or the possibility of niche market farming, that they need to now restrict themselves even further than saying, keep all your residential footprint in one corner instead of spread all over. Because with all the rest of it, you get the duck pond, you get the little horse paddock, the other little, whatever, bocce ball or something, and next thing you know, it's a recreational playground, spread over 50 acres or the middle of 50 acres. So part of this, I think, is to get a sense of how much is shifting all the time with ag. And that we can't predict what a provincial government will dictate to the land commission regardless of whether or not they agree. And without sounding too political, you saw the removal of one agricultural land commission chair. Abrupt removal, I think, is of ideological changes or differences, disagreements between the commission today and the provincial government. So I think our role is partly to listen to staff about how can we keep agricultural land reasonably affordably available for ag. But at the same time, understanding the pressures that different provincial governments put out. Some to say conserve, some to say just develop.
Super insightful, thank you.
So
In my opinion, all of that, my observation, not a board position.
So I have a question about that from this agricultural land reserve and commission overview, Sadie, that you set aside for me. Partway through it, it talks about some of the changes, and this is what we're just talking about, exclusions from the ALR Bill 15 before and after that, and there's a private landowner crossed right out, and this is, I'm guessing, what you were just referring to. Private landowner applications are not being encouraged. And then there's prescribed public landowner. What does that mean? Because it's in red.
Describe public landowner,
Yeah.
Sadie, you guys gonna have to help me. Is
I
that?
don't know if I know that one.
there are
Um,
It's in your, yeah. in your thing, yeah.
I
Well,
wonder if this is, like, I've heard that language used before, prescribe something in the Local Government Act, and that prescribe denoted something that the province just identified. So like for the riparian areas regulation, I believe it is, they talk about prescribed regional districts, which is like basically a list that they picked out. So it might be referencing something, but I don't have a good answer. But I can look it up for maybe next meeting.
Okay, just because the private landowner applications were in Bill 15, and then since the changes which happened spring and fall, 2019 and 2020, private landowner is gone, and public landowner is now only prescribed public landowner, but it's not really clear what that, if you can clarify that at some point, that'd be great.
Yeah. Is it possible for you to like follow up after the meeting and just type that question to me?
Sure.
Because I'm just not super familiar with it. Thanks.
Okay,
I wonder if it's where an OCP designates ag land for future development. If, you know,
Can I comment on basically what you've shared, Gary? I understand this is your opinion, but I want to see if what I'm understanding, and this ties into a lot of other legislation that's coming down the line and so on. So my concern would be, and I think I'm echoing what you're saying. So with the ALR being basically protected on the island and the lower mainland and the Okanagan, but not
perhaps
being
more aggressively, maybe more aggressively.
more aggressively protected. And so my main concern would be there is a disconnect about us wanting to be food resilient, to be growing. So this is like near and dear to my heart. We're talking right about where this is what I care about more than anything. And so with all of the other narrative stuff around housing and so on, so if I'm understanding kind of what's going on right now, we need to keep our ear to the ground about some of these policy changes, because if the ALR is going to be what essentially keeps it so that we can be more food resilient, growing our own food, as opposed to developers coming in and buying up this land and changing the policies on this land so that they can just be developing it to be meeting these housing prices. So we're gonna have all this housing, but we can't feed people. And but feeding people locally. So I'm just trying to clarify if I'm getting a bit of a gist of this is sort of what you're talking about a bit, that is something that we need to be aware of and not, I don't know, am I understanding?
Yeah. Yes, we support several food initiatives. Sadie, I see you wanted to comment. We're supporting food initiatives in the fronts. Sadie?
Yeah, I was also going to say, the framework that I've kind of tried to show here is how much both on the provincial and the local level is actually done to protect agriculture. So even those changes in 2022, the ALR, which is established in the 70s, there is a lot of ways that, agriculture is already supported. And a big one that'll affect your commission work is through zoning. So the agricultural land reserve, specifically for properties in the ALR, they kind of set the minimum standard for a lot of these rules. So they'll say, oh, you can't have more than 2 residences of a certain size. But the local government can actually be more restrictive in those cases. So they can say, oh, even though the ALC or the ALR, you know, this property allows 2 dwellings, we're actually just going to say it's 1 because that's going to give us better outcomes for our community's needs. So, you know, while there's no current ag policy review or anything like that happening right now, I think it's really good for you guys to just understand the context and how planning has happened in the past. And just to be sort of on top of it for if any changes come in the future, or if, you know, as community members, you're seeing any issues that are coming up, and also just giving input on any agricultural applications that come through.
Okay, thanks, Sadie. And can you clarify, so the ALC, the Agricultural Land Commission, is that the commission that gives input about the ALR policies?
Kind of. It's super confusing, the language, but I think they're technically called an administrative tribunal. So basically when somebody wants to do something, when their property, say an individual landowner wants to do something to their ALR property, that's not permitted by the ALC regulations, then they can make an application to the ALC to basically for a variance, kind of like what we've been talking about. And this, you know, administrative tribunal will look at that application and they'll basically say yes or no based off their rules. That's like a really simplified version, but is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. And then maybe, and you might have already said it, Gary, so I'm just trying to get, so at what government level is the ALR determined? Like that's at a provincial level?
Yeah, the ALR is provincial.
Okay,
And then the zoning would be sort of how we typically match up with their regulations. So there's the provincial zoning and the local zoning, and they both apply to property owners if you're in the ALR.
okay, that's
Yeah.
clear.
Through either legislative change or order in council, provincial government can give the Agricultural Land Commission a different mandate and change the mandate. And they've had over the years, and they've also changed the people involved over the years.
Right.
I was also gonna mention, there's, well, first, and they are, as a tribunal, they made a very strong point, and I think I omitted this, Sadie, when I was going through my historical emails and notes on this. They're a quasi judicial body, and it's not to be subject to political interference.
The commission, the ALC.
ALC, agriculture, they're one of these unique quasi judicial bodies that someone like me should never go in and say, oh, but Bill and Ann are great people, you should give them something. They should never hear any political interference. The only things that they should get are comments as a body, as a board, based on advice from the staff on, often it's like 3 simple questions. Do we support the application? Do we have no comment? Or do we not support? If we do not support, it doesn't move forward. So we have a point of control that we need to recognize. That for some applications, some things that have to be referred through us, as a local government, we can say, if this doesn't fit with what we're trying to do, based on your giving us the ability to represent you, we can stop some things. But maybe there's some things we can't. You see your hand. We do have a point of control that we have often washed our hands up and just put through no comment to see what the ALC says. Am I off base on that, Sadie?
No, you're absolutely right. I was just gonna provide another detail. I think like just for your guys as the commission, this stuff is super confusing. Like I've been doing planning for 2 years now, and I feel like I'm just getting the hang of how they interlace. So don't feel bad if it's confusing. But the one caveat I would say is that with these applications, when they have to go to the RDCK and then the ALC, we can't actually really deny them if they're in an unzoned area. So we can't stop the application.
That was my,
at the RDCK for unzoned areas, just for zoned areas.
thank you. That was my next question. So thank you for being.
There we
ahead of
go.
it. And,
Excellent.
and so because that would tie into the OCP to some degree, right? The official community plan, depending on what, because if the zoning changes on the OCP, then we're starting to affect that process.
Two different,
Are they?
they're different, they can be in the same document, so area A, they're contained in the same bylaw, comprehensive land use bylaw, club. Government loves acronyms, but there's two parts to that comprehensive land use bylaw. The first part is the OCP, which is supposed to be kind of more aspirational, make statements about, you know, the future and vision and how development will roll out in the future. Plus, it should reflect, doesn't always, should reflect DC assessment authority. So DC assessment authority says your property is single family residential and yours is tourist commercial. Well, let's pick, mine is tourist commercial, it actually is. So if there was a difference in taxation to be paid and a tourist commercial, then down the road, if I was unzoned, but my land use designation is tourist commercial, if we moved to zoning, the first assumption would be I'd be zoned as tourist commercial. And in fact, that's exactly what happened to my property some years ago. So the OCP has a land use designation, which may be accurate or may be inaccurate. You might actually be commercial, but you'd rather not have the BC Assessment Authority increase your property taxation based on their mandatory formula that we must follow. And then when you come to de-zone, because you declared yourself single family residential, when you come to de-zone, first thing we'll put on the map is what's already on the map. You're in fact single family residential, you're not a commercial operation. So the zoning is where the teeth are. That is where there's more opportunity, whether you like it or not, for local government to say, hey, we have some concerns and complaints about what's going on here. And maybe your neighbors think that what you're doing is not appropriate for your community and for your zoning, and start some kind of investigation. Some people say, stay away from us, we don't ever want to have that happen to us, and other people say, you know, it's about time we had that tool, as their neighbors are not good neighbors. So zoning and official community plan are different things,
But they tie into. each
but
other.
they end up tying into each other, because they're going through a massive, like, kind of reconciliation. Where the heck are we at in this regional district right now with this?
And this is why I'm asking, because this is also super important in my opinion and
It is,
concerns.
uh,
Yeah, particularly for many of us who choose to live in a place without zoning where the creeping is happening, so.
so. Sadie, it's on the website now. The planning workshop documents are all there. You want to see what we talked about collectively a couple of weeks ago. It's there, isn't it, right now?
We can look that up, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think.
I don't know if you have access to it as like members of the public or commission members, but Gary, if there's something you think that would be, you know, helpful as background from that, I can send it out to the commission. I just don't think it's publicly available.
Okay, I thought we did post, first we posted the climate action plan information, which provided the directors, that's on there, as I understand.
Yes, it is, I found it
And
today.
I thought my understanding was that the public should also be able to see our workshop, basic information on the planning workshop. That would.
Yeah,
Seems honest, we didn't hold an open public meeting because we wanted to have very informal interactions opposed to our sort of more structured meetings. But I thought that information would be available.
And that was an OCP planning?
No, it was just planning, development.
Because Sadie, I haven't seen a summary of it yet emailed to planning staff.
yeah, like nobody, I'm not like running that project or anything, but no one sent me something to be like, Sadie, put this on the website, other than what's on eScribe. But it's not something I don't think we couldn't do. It would just be following up as like, what documents do we want to put up there? And maybe Dan is already in the process of doing it, but I just don't know anything about it right now.
Okay, so it's something we'll look at the agenda prep, I guess. If
And
we
that
have
you
to
can't
discuss.
begin,
Well, Dan is the lead planner,
lead planner, right?
Dan Hawkins. But
Oh, okay.
maybe we'll have a discussion at Rural Committee about transparency about what.
Yeah, I know staff was summarizing all of those conversation,
Yeah.
those coffee roundtable discussions, but I'm not sure where those were going other than to Dana. I'm not sure what she was gonna do with them, but.
All right, thank you. Learned so much. Okay,
Yeah, climate action is on the news February 16th.
yeah,
Maybe the other one's gonna come within a week or so.
okay, yeah, because I did just find the CAP stuff today, so that was great. Thank you for letting us know about that at the Rindell
Yeah.
meeting.
But
Okay, so I'm not really sure where we are on this. Agriculture, but is there more to cover here?
if you guys had a chance to read this, 100 and some pages.
Oh, yeah, I got to it
Is it-
this morning.
Does it make you want to see more, or just leave it lay until you start looking at related applications? With the ALC applications, don't mandatorily come to the APHC, do they? That'd be a director's request.
Let me just double check. I have the procedures bylaw opened here. Can't remember off the top of my head.
Come through, this being land use, will it be connected?
The local government states certain things that you should exist, it states, and it states what you should see. But it doesn't state you need to see and provide advice to your director, everything. But I would rather you guys do see this, do provide advice. So that's,
Well, and so on that, I guess that kind of segues into, so the purpose of this project was to consider current legislation, existing plans, and best management documents, as well as input from farmers, technical advisors, and the public to amend the OCP and zoning bylaws with goals supporting farming and protecting farmland in the regional district. So is this what you're talking, so this?
the last big project.
Okay, and that was in January of 2022.
Yeah.
And do we have access to that as the public?
Yeah, so
There were multiple like public engagement opportunities, and if you just go on the website, it was like one of the links, the first links there. You can kind of see a summary of how the process happened.
Okay, and that would be the agricultural policy review link?
Yeah, exactly. And it's maybe a bit confusing because they did it by sort of region. So a couple areas were grouped together. So not all of it will apply to area A, but I think it's pretty clearly laid out on the website.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you for helping with all the confusion. Okay, and then. And then this next part is kind of what we were just talking about, right, Gary?
I'm not on the same page as you.
Oh, you're not.
We're sort of, this,
The 2010,
Looking at 6.1, where it goes into the 3 steps
yeah, to the, in the
of the
20.
recommendation.
right, okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we were sort of overviewing.
Yep.
Yeah,
Because, there's. I don't know if you're familiar when you look through stuff like soil classifications, so Creston Valley has some. Classification,
Yeah.
1, lots 2 and 3, then you move further away, you get like 4 and 5, you could farm it, but. It's stony, it drains too fast, won't hold water, or it's inundated too much of the year, or this or that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't farm it, right? So. As we were looking at, these things around capability, and where to focus on areas. I guess, again, my opinion, I was seeing too many people saying, well, let's go back to Hagen, this is, a lot of the land is 4 or 5. It's never gonna be viable to do anything on it. You say, well, if the land was relatively cheap and close enough to market, you had the Nelson Co-op that'll take almost any produce that comes locally within 100 mile, and you get a good dollar for it, better than anywhere else. Have access to farmers markets, you put a greenhouse up, start your plants, and you can outreach your soil, you can get wood chips here. It's not out of reach, right? So we were seeing sometimes people say, well, this land's never even good. No, yeah, if you're down in Crescent Valley, nobody would buy land that looks like Taggart if you lived in Crescent Valley. But if you lived in Taggart, you're serious about farming. So these are the bigger questions to me about how we needed to say, we don't start keeping some of this land from being built over now. It'll never
Yeah.
be fun.
Well, and I think we almost have to have a language change from farming to food production.
Food production.
Because, right? Because we're not all talking about 3 feet of topsoil and growing just beets and carrots. Right? And and moving away from conventional farming and looking at all kinds of different things. So that's interesting. I mean, obviously, we're working with the language, but maybe I'll just put that on the table that if we think beyond the language of farming, we're looking at food production
And
and
it process.
processing, value added. There's many different components to how food gets into our belly, is what it is.
So that's why we've supported things like the Creston Food Hub and other food
Right.
hubs that are emerging. We've supported the across 3 regional districts, farm advisors. That's being, partial funding through Columbia Basin Trust plus Big Boundaries, Central and East Boothby. We've supported them with projects to say that it's one thing to have some land, it's another thing to support people to be able to market what they have, to be able to understand if there's either a problem with the soil or pests or whatever, how can they remedy those and have local expertise that understands that, sure. So we've supported quite a few projects.
And there's agroforestry and there's so many, I mean, I could go on and on, I'll
Yeah.
spare everyone, but this is basically why I'm on this commission. So because of this particular thing.
Well, and can I add one thing?
Yes, please.
That's a really helpful thing to think about is, as commission members, you guys are getting some more education and, just kind of these materials handed to you. And it's really great if you can be that voice in the community and pass on some of these things, because I think there is a lot of lack of understanding of how this works, and no shade because it's super confusing. I understand why people don't want to dive into it, but as you say, it's really important and it has a lot of value. So, feel free to share any of those public materials with your community members as well.
Thank you, Sadie. And I just want to acknowledge both you and Gary for taking the time for increasing our education, because it is a lot to understand and it does make it more viable for us to take some of this into the community.
Yes,
Translating basically, yes. And transparency, I appreciate you, Gary, for really stepping up to that and actually leading by example.
I might have made some bad assumptions on that other planning thing, but we'll find out.
Yeah. Just even bringing transparency to the table. So then,
Chairperson, I can't stay for the end of the meeting, I have to
Oh.
get back.
oh,
So-
do you need to drive?
No,
Do you
no,
drive?
I have arrived,
Oh,
but I
okay.
have to get
I
back
don't even know what time it is.
and catch a phone call that's really important, it's 3:20.
It's 3:20. Okay. I mean, do we want to wrap up? I think we could wrap up pretty quick.
Sure.
Okay.
You've
What
got,
was the
It's-
6.2?
6.2 is there was some confusion about the time and location of the
Oh,
meetings
right.
because,
So
okay,
I'll address that if I may.
okay.
Um,
Did I miss any steps with 6.1? It was just discussion, right? Okay, 6.2, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so there's TAPS meetings that conflict some of the suggested dates for these meetings. And there's only 2 or 3 days, I believe they're in, I sent you a list of the ones that conflict, right, Sadie? I think they're on
Yeah.
in June, July. Anyway, we could either make those 2 meetings even half an hour later, starting at 2:30, which would accommodate that, or we could just make them all at 2:30 and then there'd be no conflict for the rest of the year.
How does that work with the ferry?
That's
Yeah.
fine. And I don't know if I'll be here, but
Okay.
I do enjoy the ferry, so hopefully.
It's
Hopefully I
absolutely
can
fine
keep-
from staff side. Whatever works for the commission will work for us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it just
it
might
doesn't
be,
work.
it just might be easier for scheduling with the Great Creek Hall to just have them across the board 2:30, then there's no conflict at all.
and today, this meeting is a conflict with like Economic Action Partnership, Preston. But that was shifted to 1:30 to 3, so.
Right.
This, yeah, okay.
Yes, and
But as far-
services usually goes from 9
Yeah.
to Preston.
But this is access to the hall.
To the hall, I'm
Right?
just talking about
Yeah.
the
Okay.
Yeah, being a board member of the hall, I'm just looking at what's already scheduled.
But if it was
Okay,
instead of,
then.
Do you want to ask if anybody has any opposition to that, or we just want to go ahead? And
well, if it was 3 p.m. or is that getting too late in the day?
I'm okay with that.
Well,
Everybody have flex time?
I
And
would have,
summer.
I would have to look at the hall schedule again to see if that conflicts,
So that,
yeah.
that's,
I know that 2:30 doesn't.
that's.
Do you want to just look at 3 and then get back to it?
Sure,
Yeah,
we can do
okay,
that, yeah.
okay.
If
Okay.
3 works better for you, Gary, I can check the hall and see if that works. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Anyway,
Okay, and then, and there's no public here, so.
Yep, there was, is there still observer? You should ask.
There
Oh,
is an observer online.
There is?
Yeah, observer was quiet this morning.
Okay, any questions from the public?
Residents, says no questions, thank you,
Oh.
on chat, so
Okay.
thanks for responding.
Thank you for responding. And the next electrolyte advisory planning, I guess is what, there's no conflict of interest on this, is that correct? The April 4th one?
no,
So we'll go ahead with that time for April 4th at this point. We're not going to change that one at 1 o'clock PST, 2 Mountain Time here again. And the time will have changed. The time will be the same, so spring ahead. So it'll just be 2 o'clock.
2 p.m. in both time zones.
Finally.
2:30 or 3, what are we doing for this next one?
You move it to 2:30 if you want, it does give you flexibility. My colleague,
I'll just check
Yeah, why don't you?
with one thing, I'll just,
Yep.
And then we'll find it. We'll
actually,
decide.
she's
Okay.
coming momentarily, I can talk to her and we can go over it, and I can get back to you in the next couple of days.
Have a discussion on it.
Yeah,
Sadie, I'm just wondering, like, when we give our recommendations, for
Yeah.
instance, the last meeting was for
Yeah.
Mr. Drysdale. Is there any follow-up for us on what the determination was so that we can use that information for future similar scenarios?
Yeah, basically it all gets posted online onto our active applications and closed applications page. I'll make a note of it and I'll send it out to you so that you can keep tabs on it. But yeah, it's all publicly available.
That's on the RDCK website?
Yeah,
And.
and
with
if you want more insight, I can always help you find it or
Thanks. And then just one more thing that I could maybe add to the next meeting is about the secondary housing. Just what the regulations are gonna be around that.
there's, Creston has just put up their Creston Housing Hub. I don't know if you've had a chance either of you to look at it yet. It's a good source of information. I've mentioned it in a couple of meetings already. It tells you, without trying to be your financial advisor, I'm not trying to make any decisions for you. It tells you where you can apply for grants. Tells you where you can apply for grants. It tells you a little bit about what a owner builder is versus, this and that. It's got quite a bit of information across the first top banners. The more detailed information is maybe more specific to town residents, but it's a good start. So if you search Creston Housing Hub, Ash has done quite a good job of putting up residential tenancy act, link to that, so you can understand some of that. It's a good starting point, I think, for people, the $40,000 potentially forgivable loan from flowing through the feds. That kind of information's on there.
And I know Sadie was in the building department. They were meeting about that $40,000. The grant.
Yeah, there's a grant opportunity. It's basically for individual people to build secondary suites in their homes. You can apply for a $40,000 loan, I believe it is. And that process opens in April. I don't know too many details about it, but I can send it on to you guys if you're interested.
Building department at the RDCK, they were meeting about it, so they did a session on it because I don't know why we weren't included, but
The one is you must have a building permit to be eligible. If you're doing a reno or converting a shed to a carriage house, you have to have building inspection involved. Otherwise, the feds won't give you
and
that.
maybe it was the way that the building departments are proving it to the province or,
There's
It's federal funding?
flows from feds, I understand. Maybe it's I'm actually not certain.
Okay.
I thought there was a partnership agreement there with the provinces. And if you rent it or have it available to rent under certain conditions for 5 years, there's a potential for that loan to forgive it.
Yeah, it's rented at market.
But of course, if you have to put, as we just heard here, if you have to put in septic, you have to satisfy your health, if you have separate filtration and water treatment for both residences, that exceeds 40,000 by several times. But it's something. And it's matching, you have to match it every dollar. So you have to spend 80,000 for 40,000.
Oh, yeah.
It's matching.
Yeah, it's always thoughts to know.
And does that fit in with this, again, in this, ALR Commission overview, there's a residential flexibility policy intent. Where it states local governments would be able to further regulate and or restrict based on community need. What does that really mean,
Yeah.
community need?
That's a little bit different, but that might be like we just saw pushback from Town of Creston. We said we wanted the, you can be more strict than the land commission's requirements. And we have a restriction on where you can build on that footprint on that agricultural property. Whatever it is, 60 meters back and so much width. And so a recent one was, well, somebody has an existing building that's further than that. They'd like to make that a livable residence. So now they have to come to local government to say, well, is it important enough for us to meet that second residence to override what we think is in the best interest to keeping the farmland productive by concentrating the residential footprint. So there's community interest sometimes to provide additional housing. Where you'd say, yeah, that overrides the need for keeping all the farmland cheap and available.
So community need is actually more the individual's property, not the community at large necessarily.
I think they'd be talking about community at large, unless I'm misinterpreting something else or at an OCD.
I mean, I think, yeah, it's kind of a little bit confusing, but I guess when you think about the way that the agricultural land reserve and the local zoning, like our RDCK zoning interacts, the agricultural land commission permits your house and also a detached unit now. But in the RDCK and in Area A, I don't think there's any provision for that second detached unit unless it's farm worker housing. So that's a case where we were more restrictive, and that was partially the result of the agricultural policy review, because that was one of the changes that they were considering at the time. It's like, oh, well, should we be more permissive now that the Agricultural Land Commission or the Agricultural Land Reserve is more permissive, if that makes sense, with like additional dwellings on ag land.
And we had a pushback from town because our restriction, they thought would hinder future growth of the Creston Valley as a whole. Because there's potentially a lot more opportunity to have more people residing 10 or 20 minutes away from downtown Creston than trying to densify Creston. So there's pushback there. What was the best community interest? Was to allow regional growth. We don't have regional growth strategy. We started talking about it. It's part of the planning workshop, and that's a document the public should have a look at. Also to that, the town is doing quite a bit by enabling carriage houses, reducing parking requirements and green space requirements for multi-unit rentals. They've done other steps that they will have in place, I think, by 2 or 3 months through their first, second reading hearings and adopting bylaw changes. So they're doing things to densify the town, that they push back at us because we were doing things to maybe not make it as easy to grow the region by having more people living just 20 minutes from downtown Creston. So these are things I think we still need to talk about. And this is where I think using perhaps restrictive covenants that we start saying, yeah, you can do a little more in your land, but then you're gonna hit a limit. You're not gonna keep applying for more variances and more of this and more of that.
And so that's another question with this whole 30-30 voluntary covenants, is like, how does that all tie into?
Work in progress.
That's something I brought up, we're talking about the
Yeah.
30% of the land
Yeah.
by 2030.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I asked about that last
Yeah.
year, you did, saying it was kind of.
yeah,
Nebulous.
Yeah.
nebulous, those are good words.
Sadie, you'll know all about it.
There are already cases where in a way, they're kind of voluntary covenants that people sign up for, like when they're doing a subdivision. It's not something that we would require necessarily, but MODI, the Ministry of Transportation, will require it as a condition, especially with regards to like floodplains. So say if there's a water course on the property, they might make the property owner sign a covenant saying they're not going to build within 15 meters of that water course or to different flood specifications. So this does kind of already happen, but then it can be tricky to administer and regulate and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, like Gary said, there's a lot to dig into on it.
It just, we hear things like, by 2030, and we're in 2024 and it's nebulous, but then all of a sudden it's not nebulous and there's these new restrictions, like that's just what I'm trying to wrap my head around. And it sounds like the words I hear from you a lot, Sadie, it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, I honestly wish that planning could just be way easier because it's so interesting and it has such a strong impact on the community. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is. Like I'm still pretty new to planning, but yeah, doing our best to try and simplify things over here.
Appreciate those efforts for sure.
And recognizing the province can introduce
Yes.
legislation in the fall and say it's gonna be forced and start hopping and changing by, say, June 2024.
Yeah,
Last fall to June, they're backed off on some of that, but if you need that.
yeah,
they're not-
and that's why I'm bringing it
Oh,
up, because, and of course you guys are at the whims of that as well, so. Yeah, all right. Anything else at this point?
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
At 3:33,
Oh, I love it.
or my
Thank you.
recognition machine.
Okay, I'll second that motion and. Call it a day. 3:33.
Thanks very much, everybody, and look at that, I still have, this says